We are living in a new era, the deepest technological revolution in human history.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Alicia Sudlow-Poole. I'm here representing Juniper Research. I'm a research analyst at the firm. So welcome to A Match Made in Space. Today we're going to talk about all things satellite communications, its impact on the telco space, its impact on established net technologies such as edge computing, and how it's going to significantly impact and significantly help the digital divide that we're seeing or the global coverage gap. So I'm just going to introduce the schedule of the session before we get started. So we're going to start with two presentations. Following those presentations, I'll invite the panelists to the stage, and then we'll have about a 20-minute discussion on what they're doing in the market and their thoughts of the future. So first, I'm going to introduce Margo Deckerd, COO of Lynk Global, who will do a presentation, and there will be space for questions at the end of her presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Margo Deckerd, and I'm Lynk's Chief Operating Officer and also a co-founder. I head our emergency response, government, and regulatory teams. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I'm going to share Lynk's story with you because we are at the forefront of satellite direct-to-phone. So Lynk was born in 2017 out of work that I did in the 2014 Ebola pandemic crisis response in Liberia and Sierra Leone. I was tasked to deploy BGAN units, which are VideoSat terminals, to forward field hospitals, and then analyze how these units were used. And when I looked at how these forward field hospitals use these VideoSat terminals, I noticed that most of them were only ever texted from. Think about the information that can be contained in a text. Infection rates, fatalities, supply requests. Think about the time saved if an emergency response team simply has to grab their go bag and their phone and respond to a crisis. It's very clear that the terminal is the problem. It has to be the one already in everyone's pocket, the one they can afford. So together with my fellow co-founders, we designed cell towers in space that connect to that device you already own. We're the world's only patented, proven from orbit, and commercially licensed satellite direct-to-phone system today. So Lynk partners with mobile network operators. They bring the customers and the spectrum, and we bring the infrastructure to fill in their coverage gaps, extend their coverage, or provide their network resiliency when they lose it for whatever reason. We do this by taking the terrestrial base station and moving it onto our small satellites in low Earth orbit, and solving for the two parameters you have to solve for to make this magic work. Doppler shift, because now your cell tower is moving relative to you, and extended range time delay, because now, instead of being 20 kilometers from your tower, you're 500, and that's our patented secret sauce. So our satellites are actually the weakest signal in the sky until your customer roams out of terrestrial coverage. Then our signal becomes the strongest, and they seamlessly roam onto our network. So here in the turquoise box, you can see one of our cell towers in space. In fact, this is our first commercial-ready cell tower. It's roughly 1 meter by 1 meter, and we launched this in April last year. So the first 3 commercial cell towers in space are on orbit today, including the first 5G capable payload. We're testing at 18 countries on 7 continents. Just in December, we tested with the United States National Science Foundation in Antarctica. With $2.6 billion in commercial contracts with 27 MNO partners around the world, we will be launching intermittent commercial service next month. We received our license from the FCC in September of 22. We're on a path to provide broadband in 2025. So our initial commercial services include SMS texting and emergency cell broadcast, but as we build out the network, we'll move to mobile money and push to talk, and then arrive at broadband in 2025. This is real data from a test that we conducted with one of our MNO partners in Mongolia. Now, the Lynk satellites can do 2 ConOps. That we can sweep a beam, or we can site track. And when we site track, that kind of looks like the exact same footprint you might get from a normal terrestrial tower. So as the Lynk base station passes overhead, all these little white dots you see are over 1,000 3GPP compliant devices that are outside of terrestrial coverage, hear the Lynk base station, and request to register. We connect feature phones, like $5 feature phones, smartphones, including the Apple i14 and Samsung devices used around the world, and tractors, IoT devices. Now that you've seen what it kind of looks like from space, this is what it looks like on the ground. This we did with our MNO partner Alive in the Bahamas. You're going to hear the emergency cell broadcast be received by the phones, and you can also see in the still shot, you'll see the phone receive a series of texts. This is actually part of a demo we do, and we actually call this our loopback test. That's where we send a text up to the satellite, and the satellite texts the phone back. But also at the same test, but not pictured, we do device to device.
Alive Bahamas.
Not pictured here is another application that we have. It's called Linkcast. Linkcast is a critical weather information app that was developed with funding from the UK Space Agency. It's meant for smallholder farmers to help them improve farming outcomes. We actually tested it with 46 farmers in Kenya. And if you think about how they're using these smallholder farmer hotlines in Africa to improve farming outcomes, they're also layering that with actually the COVID health advisories. So in Ethiopia, they have an agricultural hotline that reaches 3.6 million callers, but with the Lynk system, it'll reach an additional 36 million more. So the Lynk team is very clear on what our mission is. It's truly global, truly affordable coverage. So together with our MNO partners, we're going to fill in their coverage gaps, we're going to extend their coverage, and we're going to provide their network resiliency when their customers need it the most. So thank you so much. I saved a few minutes at the end because I'd like to have a conversation. So if anyone has a question, I'm happy to take it. No questions? Well, then maybe I could just, oh, sir? That's a great question. So the gentleman asks, what's the barrier to broadband? Actually, we can provide broadband on our satellite today. We can do voice calls and we can do data. The reason why we're not rolling that service out is, one, because our initial constellation is comprised of 10 satellites, so coverage is intermittent. And so we've targeted what we call low Erlang traffic, so we can serve the most users at any one time, and that's SMS texting. And actually, over the past several months, and in the current disaster crisis, we've actually rolled out emergency cell broadcast in several geographies. Sir? That's a great question. So at about 41 satellites, we'll have seamless texting for your customers. That means your customer won't notice. When we did the field testing with the 46 Kenyan farmers at the top of their app, it said now is when you get your coverage, so you need to go outside and make sure that you pick up your latest weather information and farming information. But when we reach a little under 1,000, we'll be doing voice and broadband. But we've targeted a larger constellation of around 5,000 satellites at the ITU. That allows us redundancy within our architecture. Thank you.
Within the constellation itself, how are you managing the potential power consumption constraints when needing to provide services like voice or broadband in the future?
That's a really good, very technical question, and I'm happy to follow up with some additional information. So obviously, when we're over the oceans, even though we do support maritime traffic and even have a contract for that, it's a lot less power, so that gives the solar panels a time to regenerate before the constellation moves into a higher use. And we use inter-satellite links between the different layers of the constellation in order to make sure we meet customer demand. The frequencies that we use. That's a great question, and I think it's garnering a lot of attention. So the Lynk satellite system uses UHF frequencies, sub 1 gig, specifically 617 to 960 megahertz. And if you were able to attend Chairwoman Rosenworcel, she's chair of the FCC, or the Secretary General of the ITU's remarks, you can see that the FCC is leaning into reimagining MNO partnerships and what it means to provide mobile satellite services for the world. So thank you very much for the question. I think I have time for one more. Right, exactly. So the gentleman asked if we only use the frequencies that our MNO partner is licensed for, and that's exactly what we do. We use a software-defined radio, which allows us to customize for our customers around the world. So thank you so much for your attention and your time, and I look forward to meeting some of you later. Thank you.
I want to thank Margo for her great presentation. It's really great to see what Lynk's getting up to in the space. And it's also great to have some interaction from you guys as well. So for the next presentation, I'd like to introduce Neil Masterson, the CEO of OneWeb, who will also introduce what they're getting up to in the satellite communication space.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. So good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. So I'm very pleased to be here to talk to you about space, connectivity, and also OneWeb. So since the last NWC, OneWeb has made incredible progress in our mission to remove the barriers to connectivity. And so I thought I'd start off is where we are now. And as we speak, I'm delighted to say that my colleagues we have colleagues in Florida right now, but also in India, and now working with our launch partners to prepare the final 2 launches to complete our constellation. So with these 2 deployments, which we expect to complete in March, we will complete our global network of low Earth orbit satellites. Now, to give you some context, we've conducted 16 launches already, and our constellation is now the 2nd largest in the world. We have 542 satellites in operation today, and we are live. The network is live and providing connectivity to customers and communities above the 50th parallel. Now, OneWeb, I think, is a very important point here. We absolutely share your mission of closing the digital divide and connecting the billions of people around the world who do not have access to reliable connectivity. And we do this, and this is a very important point, we do this by working with you as our wholesale partner. We see ourselves as a wholesale partner and part of the solution that you provide to customers. Okay, we're not seeking to disintermediate you, we work for you to help you serve your customers. Now, the key point here is that we complement your network to provide coverage in areas where terrestrial network is either not feasible or, if it's feasible, just very expensive. And so today what I'll try and do is, in this brief presentation, is cover 3 points. The first, give you a sense of the rapid progress OneWeb has made to provide connectivity from space. Two, also explain why we think we're the partner of choice for the telecoms industry. And last, give you a sense of the applications where we are already seeing strong customer demand. So let me give you a sense of where we are to date. Now, many of you may be familiar with OneWeb and the benefits of LEO power connectivity. You just heard about some of the use cases just now. In summary, it allows us to provide a high-speed connectivity to even the most remote locations at latency of less than 100 milliseconds round trip. Our technology is suitable for new applications such as community broadband, but also edge computing. It offers clear advantages over alternative technologies and unlocks new opportunities previously impossible via satellite communications. Now today, OneWeb is serving live customers across Alaska, Canada, parts of the UK, Greenland, and also parts of Northern Europe. We're achieving 98.5% to 99% network availability at the end user level in some of the most difficult locations on the planet. In May, our service expands to the US, Southern Europe, Australia, and the Middle East. And in the summer, we will go right down to the 25 degrees north of the equator and 25 degrees south of the equator, and by the end of the year, we will complete with global coverage. We have 138 customer trials taking place or in progress, with 27 different partners, and we're active in 15 countries from Alaska to Australia. And by the end of the year, as I mentioned, our constellation will be north of 600 satellites, delivering global coverage with 1.1 terabits of cellular capacity for an industry-leading communications service. With each new area covered, we enable connectivity to more unserved and underserved communities, transforming lives at scale. If we go forward one more slide here. Ah, there we are. So we built our network, and clearly, as you can see from some of the names on the exhibit behind me, we built our network with established industry partners, also turning many of them into potential customers. Hughes and Airbus amongst them. The ethos of collaboration is central to our progress to date. We simply can't do this alone, but nor do we seek to. And going forward, our success will be based upon working with the industry to devise solutions for the industry. Our proposition is really quite simple. Hard to execute, but quite simple. We're here to help our partners to serve their customers. Our distribution partners serve their customers based on long-term relationships that they have nurtured. Our goal is not to break those relationships, but to nurture them and not to disintermediate you. We also provide them with a high level of commercial and technical flexibility to tailor to their needs. We have signed over 50 telecom partners to date, leaders in their segments and also in the geographies they operate. AT&T, Airtel, Telstra, BT, and Bell Canada. And you'll see some more announcements during the course of this Congress. We've also thought very carefully about our business model. We refined our wholesale proposition in a way that adds value to our partners' business model. And it's a model based upon collaboration and ensuring that there's margins for our partners and never competing with them. And there's strong demand to partner with us. So actually this exhibit behind me is a polar bear proof. I mean that. It is a polar bear proof installation in the polar regions of actually Canada with Northwestel. So last month actually we confirmed that Galaxy Broadband will deliver our LEO constellations across Canada. As I mentioned, we're working with Northwestel already. And as I mentioned, there'll be further partner announcements this week. Now, many of you will know that we have a few key focus areas: cellular backhaul, community broadband, corporate and government fixed applications, maritime, aviation, and land mobility markets. These will help our partners provide services that support remote mines, emergency services, smart agriculture, oil and gas sites, schools, rural businesses, and civil government services. There is no shortage of use cases here, and we can help our customers do this where there's little or no viable alternative to or no reliable connectivity. So let me touch on several opportunities in these areas, which I'll touch on very briefly. Aggregated backhaul. We're working with telcos to improve capacity, mobile resilience, backhaul, and coverage in challenging geographic locations. LEO satellite connectivity can be more cost-effective for providing rural coverage, overcoming geographical limitations, and improved resilience. Our carrier-friendly all-IP network simplifies integration for 3G, 4G, and 5G technologies, whether in fixed, temporary, or emergency response deployments. The connectivity solution helps you add value to the lives of the customers without the challenges of terrestrial backhaul in these locations. Edge compute. LEO connectivity is also enabler for edge computing, edge-to-cloud integrated solutions in remote locations. Edge compute systems need to be available no matter where the site is, whilst there is still stringent latency requirements. We can do this too. LEO connectivity can provide continuity, resilience, and infrastructure needed in a simple, bundled solution. We are actively discussing opportunities to provide alternative infrastructure for disaster recovery, networking, and connectivity to telecommunications. But as you all know, it's not just about emergencies that demand edge-to-cloud connectivity. Critical national infrastructure is increasingly diversified and distributed. Our machinery, aircraft, ships are all finely tuned using digital technology, and our security is powered by sensors and image recognition. LEO satellite connectivity delivers reach, resilience, and infrastructure for businesses and for governments. So to conclude, this is a significant moment for the satellite connectivity industry, but also for OneWeb in particular. OneWeb has rapidly scaled up its launch program, with the final launches happening this month. We've signed 50 distribution partners to roll out our services. We're ready to meet, together with our partners, we're ready to meet exponential demand for connectivity services. And we're rolling out our ground infrastructure very rapidly, but also working with our partners to develop new innovative user terminals at scale. And we remain on track to complete our merger with Eutelsat later this year, becoming the first LEO GEO player in the world, uniquely positioned to address the needs of our telco partners and your end customers. We want to be the satellite connectivity partner of choice for you, the telecoms industry. That is our goal. We're here to help you deliver for your hardest to reach customers, whilst also supporting your growth plans. And we all share the same mission, which is that we all believe connectivity everywhere changes everything. We look forward to working with you to achieve that goal. Thank you very much, and I'll take a couple of questions if I have time. No time? Okay, that's it. I'll leave it, hand it back over to you. Thank you very much indeed for your attention. Bye-bye now.
If we do end up with time at the end of the session, Neil's more than welcome to come back up and answer any questions you have. But that concludes our presentations part of our session. Now we'll move on to our panel and our discussion. I believe there's been a slight change in attendees, so unfortunately Richard can't make it, but we do have a great replacement. So first I'd like to introduce Jonathan Natris, CPO of the Bullet Group. We'll also introduce Durga Malladi, CVP GM of Cellular Modems and Infrastructure at Qualcomm Technologies. And lastly, Professor Rob Maunder, founder and CTO of Excellicom. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. So I think it'd be great to start with kind of a general question, just to get the topic started. So I think we'll go to you first, Jonathan. So where do you see the overall market for satellite-based communications, space-based communications heading? What are kind of the big use cases, or what do you see the big benefits being in this market?
Well, I think Margo highlighted some of the absolute key market opportunities. I think coverage gaps exist. We understand it's impossible for any network operator to provide 100% landmass coverage. So we have taken a very interesting approach around NTN and the use of a standard to develop a service to offer direct-to-satellite two-way messaging communications So that, I think, from our perspective, is very complementary to the mobile network operators, and also very innovative as well. We're the first to be able to do this, and we're really excited at the opportunity to bring this to people today.
Yeah, and I know obviously as well, it's also been spoken about kind of the use of smartphones and how they're going to become a big use case for this market. So go to you next, Durga. So can you tell me about satellite connectivity and its use with these smartphones?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me here. Just a side note, I did start my career in the late 90s on satellite communications. This was 20 years back in the day. We were the systems designer for Globalstar. So it's kind of nice to see a renewed interest in applications of satellites. So one of the first things that we looked at was what's changed in the segment. I think from our perspective, the way we'd like to take a look at it is there's a large diverse category of products that are out there, ranging from smartphones to IoT modules to automotive applications. There's like a bunch of them. And from our standpoint, when we start thinking about what can be done in smartphones, our focus has been on a gradual increase in terms of number of services that can come in over there, starting with as simple as emergency services. You're out there, lost, middle of nowhere, you want to make an emergency message, you want to send it out. That's like the basic thing that we want to get started with. It actually hits a very specific sweet spot for the end user. You're in the middle of nowhere, instead of having two devices, you take one and that works. Over time, we see applications going from there on to low data rate services, which goes into bidirectional text messaging and bidirectional peer-to-peer messaging and so on. And then going from there into, by the time we get to automotive, emergency calls in the middle of nowhere, you can make that call. Again, there's an emergency portion of it. And for IoT modules, think of an oil pipeline that's in the middle of nowhere, and you have a module that wakes up once every so often, sends a few bytes of data, and then goes back to sleep. So there's a wide array of applications that are out there. So from our standpoint, there's a large number of applications. The scale comes in with smartphones, obviously. That's where, if you get that going, that's one of the first things. So as Qualcomm, we focused a lot on first making sure we get the basics right and making sure that we can address an extremely large number of device categories, not just across the devices, but also different tiers of categories. So when it comes to smartphones, for instance, we don't think of it just as a premium tier offering, but going down all the way to the lowest possible tier. And that's why we made our announcement with a wide array of devices, Honor, Xiaomi, Vivo, Oppo, Motorola, and so on, to make sure that we have a very diverse set of partners in this space. So we are starting with Iridium first. It's a widely available and commercial solution today, expanding into NTN as the ecosystem matures.
And obviously we hear of all these big use cases and the big benefits of satellite-based communications. But obviously there are going to be some challenges to this. Obviously investment is one massive challenge to this space, and the amount of satellites needed to get that global coverage that is so important to this market. But Rob, I want to come to you. So what are the technical challenges that you see with these non-terrestrial based networks?
Yeah, firstly, thank you for having me. If you don't mind, I'll speak a little bit about the physical layer challenges. This is our particular focus at Accelercom. We've already heard in some of the presentations earlier about the challenges associated with the large distances over which the communication is happening between handset and satellite. And these large distances impose delays which are significant compared with the slot duration of a 5G waveform. Also, these distances are imposing challenges around path loss and around link budget. There's also challenges of the Doppler, the motion of the satellite is changing the apparent frequency of the signal and changing it by more than the spacing between the subcarriers of the 5G waveform as well. And what's more, these different effects are different for different users, different user equipment that are within the same beam of a satellite. And so techniques are needed in the physical layer in order to mitigate these challenges, not only on the infrastructure side in a way which is common across the beam, but also on the per user basis as well. So getting the best connectivity, getting that seamless service, that really requires enhancement in the physical layer and in the antenna systems as well.
So there's obviously a lot that goes into the investment that has to be made, and obviously a lot of factors that you have to think about to get this right, essentially. Yeah. So I come back to you then, Jonathan. So what is the long-term monetization goals of these networks? So obviously we can think in the short term of developing services that can be deployed now based on the number of satellites that are already in orbit, or is a long-term goal to get as many orbits up now as possible to then enable or establish future services. How do you see that dynamic changing? Because I imagine both have their benefits.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
I think, if I look at it from our perspective, we're able to offer a service. I mean, if I almost take a step back 2 years, it's taken us 2 years to do the development on the handset and the accessory, and then also to build a complementary network, which is needed in application. So the whole billing platform and everything is now available. Looking forward, that's something that we're both launching, but also interested in licensing to other manufacturers as well, to enable them to not have to go through the burden of that. Having the ability to have that platform also gives us the ability to tie into mobile network operators, because we're very complementary to a network operator. We're not threatening to them in the slightest. We're offering them a chance for 100% coverage. So we would like to be able to partner with those network operators, and are doing, in order to be able to help them reach their customers as well and offer them a new grade of service. So,
Durga, do you have any thoughts on the dynamic?
I think it's going to be, the dynamics of this they still are playing themselves out as we speak. I think that's probably the best way to think about it. There are, when I briefly mentioned earlier about emergency services and so on, there's already an existing set of service providers who provide just emergency services. So we do believe that they have a role to play in this space. We partnered with Garmin as a part of the announcement that we made about a month back when we announced our Snapdragon Satellite. They have the emergency service provision, but they are not necessarily they don't have any spectrum, they're not a wireless operator, so they'll work with anyone who can provide that service on the back-end side. And by the time we get into services like eCall or IoT-based module services, which actually, then you might have a different set of players who will come into the picture. So it's going to be a mixed set of providers who can go all the way from operators, mobile operators who have terrestrial spectrum, and we would probably want to lease capacity with someone who already has that capacity out there in the space segment. And then there are those who already have existing services, which are SATCOM services, and they can complement that with what they have, because they never really had full-blown access towards smartphone segment for the longest period of time. But that's a new opportunity for them. So we do see a mixed set of players in this space. From our standpoint, what we want to do is, we don't want to go with a situation where we have, you need to have 2 devices or something of that sort. So it's always an integrated solution.
Yeah.
So when we say a smartphone, we don't want to make it any bigger or smaller. It should be as is, as a regular smartphone, no difference to it. Somehow has to work within the parameters associated with it. And that's probably a good way of looking at, that's just smartphones. And then we can have the same kind of a structure for a lot of the other product categories as well.
Mm-hmm. I know we talk a lot about smartphones and kind of consumer devices, but what does this mean for the average consumer? Will they know that they're on an NTN network? How seamless will it be to go from, one network to the next?
Yeah, there are different ways of doing that. So for instance, when you're in the middle of nowhere, and in the US at least, when it goes to national parks and so on, very frequently you find yourself with zero coverage whatsoever. There's an icon that pops up which should indicate that, it used to say that there's no coverage, and now it should say something else.
Yeah.
That's one very easy way, intuitive way for an end user to get that indication. But I think there are other interesting applications as well as we get into bidirectional text messaging, which is not necessarily emergency. For one reason or the other, you might want to have that text messaging service go on one of the SIMs. If you have a dual SIM phone, for instance, and on the other one you want to do something else. There are different sets of things in which an end user will have that visibility immediately. But I do believe that when you go into some of those more sophisticated ones, the average consumer, I think it has to be simple enough. It cannot be something so complicated that you have to go and muck around with some of the settings and do anything of that sort. It should be intuitive, or it simply won't take off. I think it has to be as simple as that. But on the other side, when you go outside smartphones into IoT modules, that is the basic service. Low data rate services in which you wake up, send a few bytes of data and go back to sleep. That is the service. And for that, actually, it's a pretty easy way of actually getting started.
Yeah, exactly. So will this satellite connectivity be reserved for kind of premium devices, or do you see it happening on all devices at a global scale? Should we go with you, Jonathan?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I just agree very much with Durga's comments. I think our device, the phone that we're launching here, is a dual SIM device. It obviously requires an IMSI for the SAT service. It is always on cellular, and then it'll look for satellite only when it detects that you're out of cellular coverage. Because your question around use and users, it's got to be as seamless as possible and as natural as possible for people. So you will get a visual indication you're on a SAT service, and then you're able to set that through. And we've got to work as an industry on educating people on what's happening, because the capabilities on satellite at the moment are nowhere near as a 5G environment, of course.
Yeah.
You know.
So do you see it, who's going to benefit the most then from the development of these NTNs? Do you see it being the consumer or the service provider, or obviously both? Who will benefit the most?
A win-win is always the best solution. I mean, I think if we can provide a complementary service for a mobile network operator, that's fantastic. If we can provide a messaging service, as we do, a bi-directional messaging service, that helps people just be more efficient or stay in touch with their loved ones. We provide an emergency service today, actually very similar to the likes of the Garmin and Global Star emergency response centre, so people can, if they are in trouble, can get help where they previously couldn't have done that. So I think there's win-wins all round. I mean, from our perspective, we're growing the market, and obviously I can see lots of other entrants coming into this market as well, enabled by, the big chipset guys.
Yeah.
If I may, I think you speak about operators and consumers, the benefits for those. I think there's also businesses that will benefit. There'll be certain businesses where this technology is transformative and enables a business where previously it was impossible. I see very significant benefits there.
Yeah, and obviously we're starting to get into the complexities, and we're starting to understand actually how difficult this will be. And I want to come to you, Rob, actually. So obviously you hold a PhD in wireless communications. You know the really technical side of this market. So how does a market go from a kind of a proof of concept stage to something that's commercially viable, and how long would that process take, and how far away are we from that?
Well, perhaps I can give you an example, which is something we're working on, which is the 5G NTN regenerative satellite payload. So this is being standardized in 3GPP release 18. Next year will be frozen, but in advance of that we're working on proof of concept already. And we're demonstrating a single beam, a fixed bandwidth for this payload. And we're looking at how we go from this proof of concept into the commercial deployment. And of course, the freeze of the standards is an important part to that, but there's a number of other areas as well. There's aspects to do with rolling out more beams and the impact that has on the scheduler of the G-Node B, and how that works in tandem with the beam management and beam hopping technologies. There's building out the capacity of the devices. There are also aspects to do with the space hardening of the technology as well, and then supporting more users across it all as well.
Yeah, and I know you briefly spoke about 5G there, and that brings me to kind of another question. So here at Juniper Research, we obviously have seen that the deployment of 5G, or the development of 5G, has happened a lot quicker than its predecessor of 3G and 4G. So how would you see 5G having an impact in this market? Do you want to start, Durga?
Yeah, sure. By the way, just one thing that I wanted to mention just in terms of the product categories, and it is linked to, as 5G is expanding into a lot of the new categories of business segments where cellular communication did not exist before, and it's making its inroads. What we would like to see is, coming back from a SATCOM perspective, is to democratize the adoption of SATCOM-based solutions, not just across all the product categories, which I mentioned, from smartphones to IoT modules to automotive, but also across the tiers of devices. This is not something that is only for the premium tier, but it should actually go down all the way to the lowest tier. So this is like a highest perspective. Now, from 5G standpoint, 5G rollout has indeed been much faster. Today, if you take a look at it, the launch of 5G, the original launches started in 2019, spring of 2019. And since then, we've gone all the way from beyond smartphones into compute segment, into fixed wireless access, into a large number of mobile hotspots and other broadband devices where you need 5G connectivity. And we just recently announced our lowest category of 5G, which is known as a 5G Red Cap X35 based solution. That's our product name. That goes, typically we associate 5G with gigabit data rates. 10 gigabits per second. The one that we announced most recently is 200 megabits per second. Much, much lower, but it actually hits a really good sweet spot for consumer IoT and industrial IoT applications. In a similar vein, we see SATCOM adoption coming up across a broad tier of solutions. But from a 5G standpoint, Release 17, which just got completed, that was the first version of NTN, where as Qualcomm, we are an end-to-end systems company. So we design a lot of the things in-house first, then we test it out, and then we drive things into the standards. So we see the narrowband-based services for NTN as the first ones that will come up, which is what it's called as narrowband IoT NTN in Release 17,
Yeah.
but we actually just call it as narrowband NTN just because it's convenient, but it also hits a spot. It's a narrowband waveform with which we can get things done. Over time, there is a role for what is called as NR NTN. That's the broadband flavor, where maybe it's not just about text messages or low data rate services, but something that goes to medium data rate services. So at that point in time, one could start thinking of using this as a backhaul in remote areas where that is your broadband connectivity. And now we are no longer talking of just a few kilobits per second, but probably in tens of megabits per second. But just laws of physics indicate that you have to go towards higher power, so these might not necessarily be smartphones. They could be, but you might have to go towards other form factor devices where we see this adoption coming in. It's an exciting time to be in this space because there's a lot of runway ahead of us. But from our standpoint, we are starting with something very simple and basic so that we find ourselves on firm ground, and then we go from there.
And I know we are kind of coming towards the end of the session, so I want to make sure we get some final thoughts from the panelists. So I kind of finished with a more broad question, so I think we'll start with you, Jonathan. So broadly, where do you see this market over the next 5 years? How do you see it developing? I just want some final thoughts from you before we run out of time.
So quickly then, having just launched the first Release 17 compliant solution, we're keeping a very close eye on Release 18. Agree totally that this is a very narrowband approach, great for offering some basic connectivity, but we'll have to get to new radio over NTN, and that'll be probably some new LEO constellations. Spectrum is interesting, as to which ones are chosen and which winners, but I think that is going to be able to offer much more of a sensible sort of medium broadband solution. That's definitely on the roadmap, and then 6G, 3D networks, who knows? Right?
And same question to you as well, Rob. What stands out to you? What are you thinking? What first comes to mind when you think of the future of this networks?
I think the thing that really excites me about 5G NTN is the interoperability. In the past with satellite, quite typically the satellite, the handsets or the terminals have been designed together, and that's allowed quite a lot of specialization to solve real particular problems. But the promise of 5G NTN is this interoperability, the idea that you can have a many-to-many relationship between satellites and equipment, user equipment and operators, all interoperable with each other.
And finally, Durga, final thoughts?
From our standpoint, I think the way we started off by looking at NTN, and we use Iridium as one of the earliest examples of this. It's a proprietary waveform, but it works. It's a proven solution, commercial and so on. So our starting point is with Iridium and narrowband NTN today. But there's a lot of things that as we move forwards, at the end of the day, the goal is to make sure that we have ubiquitous connectivity everywhere, right? And there's so many different ways of actually getting to that solution, but where we are starting point, really excited towards that. A lot of the beamforming techniques coming up from the SAT payload space, that's probably another exciting area. We don't have a role there, but it is something important to watch out for. That's what I'm really looking forward to in the next few years.
I feel like we're just getting started in this conversation, but we are strict for time. So unfortunately, we have come to the end of the session, but if the audience has any questions for the panelists or the presenters, they're more than welcome to stay behind for a little bit. Or I'm sure you can get their contact details and speak to them after the session. Or
even better, we're in Hall 7. We've got live satellite demo on the phone and the Bluetooth accessory as well. So people are welcome to come along afterwards and come and see the demo.
So thank you, panelists, and thank you presenters as well for today, and thank you all for coming. Well done.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.